have no control over it at all, ever. Hey, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Tara Swiger, and I help makers and artists become their own business advisor and love the business that they're building. And I'm a foster mom, and today I'm going to talk about being a foster mom, which is why I'm recording in my kids' room. Click clack noise is my puppy who wanted to join us. You're a good puppy. You good puppy. This week we celebrated 1 year of parenthood. The week of October 7th, we got a call for a sweet baby girl who is 3 months old, and that became our journey of parenthood. What I wanted to share with you today is, after 1 year of being a foster parent, what have we figured out? What have we learned about the system? Like, where are we now after a year? Over on Wednesday on the podcast, you're going to hear lessons I've learned from foster parenting that I can apply to my business, and vice versa, how business lessons I had learned already applied to parenting and helped me with my parenting. So I'm looking at it from a business owner perspective on Wednesday on the podcast, but today I wanted to tell you I just want to give you an update on what it's like day to day. Throughout the year, I have posted videos over on a playlist, which you can find on YouTube. I'll link it up below, that has videos from every time we got a placement. I shot a video about the placement, and when we started taking classes, I shot videos about the classes before we ever got our first placement. So about 1.5 years of content is in that playlist that shows you our expectations and what changed and what happened with different cases and the lessons we've learned as we've gone. So today I wanted to do a bigger overview of the whole year. How is it? I talked to Jay about this. He helped me come up with this list, and this is what we came up with. The number one thing we have realized about being foster parents is that you don't know anything in the beginning of a placement. I mean, nobody ever knows anything, but in the beginning of a placement, you really, really, really don't know anything. And a lot of times this is Jay's word, he says our own hubris makes us make assumptions that end up being just totally wrong. Assumptions like, the kid is doing this because this must have been what they experienced at home. The kid is reacting in this way because they must have experienced this. And most of the time we get to know the family, we are just wrong. Just don't know what is causing what, ever. So with the toddlers, we've met families and families where they had been living before, and none of the things that we had assumed in the first couple days were right. A lot of times the kids are behaving the way that they're behaving because we're brand new. To go along with this lesson is a lesson about the system, which is, whatever you hear about a family and a reason a kid came into care is almost always not quite right. I have a theory about this, and it's that the people who work at CPS, the investigators, and that's Child Protective Services here in Tennessee, the investigators go in and see if a kid needs to be taken out of care. Well, they've seen the worst of the worst, and they see the family at their worst. They see it at the moment when they're about to lose their kids. When I go to pick up a kid, I am hearing the CPS report, and I'm usually meeting the CPS investigator. They're not the social worker that will continue to work on the case and work with the family for the length of the case. So they're the people who have seen the worst and who made the decision that this wasn't a safe place for the kids. And they've seen a lot of really, really bad things. And they talk to you, the foster parent, about why this kid came into care. That's never the whole story. And it's certainly not the birth parent's perspective of the story. And often it doesn't end up being the entire truth of the situation. More and more unfolds. Family members who are safe step forward. When you get the CPS report, it's always, this kid is all alone. This kid is badly neglected, and there is no one to help this child. Because I don't get the call until after family members have been contacted. So that's hardly ever the case. All of our cases so far have ended in kids going to a family member because that family member was there. But the report we got from CPS says that there's nothing, there's no one, they're all alone. So that's a big lesson. And I tell every new foster parent that the CPS report will be the worst thing you've ever heard. Keep an open mind and don't make assumptions about the case based on what they said. Because what the CPS person will always tell you is these parents will never get their life together. There's nobody else to help these kids. This absolutely will end in the kids staying with you forever. And so far that hasn't been the case, but that's what we've been told every time. Now, the other thing we have learned through this process is that just like CPS affects how you see the case, the first report you hear on the kid affects the assumptions you make, the social worker has a huge role to play in both how the course unfolds and your own experience of the case. So what we didn't know in the beginning is that we are going to feel differently about the kids, about the birth parents, about the social worker, no matter what our own kind of base view is. It can shift dramatically throughout the course of a case and with every different case. So if you've watched my previous videos, you know we're committed to reunification when it's safe for the kids. I have been very happy to hand over a baby I had for a week to their loving aunts, and I felt great. Like, I feel great when a kid can be with their own family member and be safe. That's the base I'm coming from, and yet the way a social worker explains what's going on with the parents can really shift how you see the potential safety of a child, or how a social worker talks about other family members really shapes your experience of it. And you can only know by your personal experience with those people, and often you don't get to have a personal experience with those people. So you're putting a lot of your trust in the social worker to make the best decisions for the kids and to really have a good sense of people and some common sense about the situation. You don't always feel like they do. So let me back up here and remind you that you have two social workers when you're dealing with a case, at least two. I have a foster care support worker. Christy, I love you. You make the experience so good. She comes to my house every month. I text her when I have questions. She comes to meetings with me. If I have been upset about something, I can tell her and she brings it up in the meeting. So it's not me being confrontational, which is great. Really helps save my relationship with bio families. She's just very encouraging. Whenever I am wondering what to do, Christy is great. If I did not have a good experience, which I have many friends who have not had a good experience with their FSW, foster care support worker, it really changes your whole experience of foster care. The second worker is the child's worker. So when the child comes into care, they're assigned a social worker in the county of which they live, which is often different than my county. So it might be somebody that's totally new to me that I don't know at all in a totally different office. And that social worker is there for the child, but they're the person that explains what the parents need to do. So one of the problems I see in the whole system is the parents don't have their own social worker. Their social worker is the child's social worker, because that social worker is committed to reunification until that proves not possible or unsafe. And so that social worker is supposed to make the best decision for the child and at the same time help the parents understand and follow through with everything they need to do in order for reunification to happen. And I keep saying parents, but it could also be other family members. So it might be a grandma or an aunt or an uncle. That's a social worker that's going to be able to communicate to you what's going on with the case. What are family members doing to move towards reunification? Are people passing their drug tests or not? Are they showing up for their therapy appointments or not? When is visitation? That is a person who supervises the visitation, decides if the people who are doing the visitation are being appropriate. It's DCS's favorite word, appropriate or not. So that person has a big role to play, both in my life and how I feel about the case, but also for the people who are trying to reunify, the parents, let's say, or the family members. They also play a huge role in how positive I feel about reunification based on what they say, which leads you in a state of feeling extreme distress over, is this safe or not for this kid? And the fact of the matter is, I have no control over it. So that's a huge lesson. You have no control over it at all, ever. Now, the people who do have control over it are the social workers based on what they put in their reports. And then from their reports, the lawyers and the judges actually decide the final thing for everything. So DCS can recommend one thing and a judge can choose something else. because the judge is listening to what DCS says, what the GAL says. The GAL is guardian ad litem. They are the attorney assigned to the child. They are supposed to advocate on the child's behalf. However, most GALs get their information from the caseworker. They see the child's caseworker as being the person who is like in it, getting the report, staying on top of it, and is concerned with the child's best interest. However, if the caseworker is focused on helping getting the parents reunifying, their report could be slanted towards the parents or away from the parents. I've only ever spoken to a GAL when I called them, when I reached out to them. One case we had, the kid moved from one home to our home. The GAL didn't even know the kid had moved. So this is the person, the only person whose legal responsibility is the well-being of the child. They didn't even know where the child lived. They didn't even know the services that the child was receiving until I explained it to them. So there's DCS, there's guardian ad litem in a courtroom situation, and then there's the parents' lawyers. And the GAL want to make sure everything is safe, so they will almost always push back a decision until the next court date. DCS and GAL almost always push it back. And so the parents' lawyers are the ones to advocate that it happens sooner. And then the judge can decide something totally different. So I've talked about what we've learned about how CPS affects the case, how a social worker affects the case, how the lawyers and judges really are the final say in a case, which is crazy because they often just know what people are telling them. Also, as I described the lawyers, you might have noticed that I don't have a lawyer. There's no one standing up there explaining to the judge any of my experiences. So even though I'm living and parenting the child day in and day out, nobody hears from me. Theory, the social worker is supposed to include the concerns, the feedback, the whatever I bring to her in her reports. The GAL is supposed to talk to me about how the child's actually doing, but in reality, the GAL often talks to the social worker, and if the social worker is non-responsive to me, my viewpoint isn't being seen at court at all. Now, you do have the option as a foster parent of getting a foster parent advocate, and that's somebody that then does speak up for you at these court dates. I haven't felt the need to do that yet because I've been comfortable with the decisions that where it's headed, where it finally ends up. I've talked about how everybody else affects the case. The final piece of it is us, right? Like, how is this affecting us? And one of the things when I talked to Jay about that he pointed out is that it affects us differently because we have different life experiences. Of course, like everything in marriage affects us differently because we're different people. One thing is that we've noticed, okay, so this is going to seem obvious to all you parents out there, but having two kids is way different than having one kid. Child, a 2-year-old, she left. We had a baby in the interim, and then we had 2 kids at once. I think the kids are home. Well, because we grew up in different families, and I am one of 4, and I had a stepbrother for a while, I experienced 2 kids very differently. Jay is an only child, and so he was used to the only child. We call it like a pea in our pea pod, right? It was normal to have 1 pea pod. It's a big change to have 2. Obviously, it's always a big change, but for me, it wasn't as hard to manage as it was for the only. The kids had just came home. Hi, sweetie. So the kids came home, and now they're in my lap. But what I was going to say is that having 2 is just different if you're used to having 2 than if you're not. Yeah, you want to go get your baby? Yes. Okay, get your baby. Our childhood experiences have a huge role to play in how we feel about parenting in general, but also types of kids, right? So there are some personalities that feel like better fits in our families and some that poke at whatever our childhood issues are. also our ability to handle chaos and our feelings of safety, all of that comes up. And it's been really interesting because it all comes up differently for us, both the individual kids and their personalities, and how they poke at us and how they push our buttons and how they don't push our buttons. And then also how the system pushes our buttons and makes us feel safe or unsafe or chaotic or not chaotic. The sound you hear is a baby stroller. Big less like realization we've had is we are so blessed that we had a very strong, open, honest marriage before all this, because of course, bye. Okay, nothing challenges your marriage like tiny people who are having big feelings and also navigating a system that is frustrating and annoying and full of meetings. That's just a huge challenge to your marriage. But when I say we're blessed, I don't just mean like we're lucky because this is hard. I mean, we already had a lot of the tools in place to deal with this. We already figured out how we communicate best. We figured out our love languages. We figured out, I gotta put baby in the stroller. We figured out how to work together as a team. Bye. Love you.
Hi.
Hi. See you later, kiddo. How we talk, how we communicate, our love languages, how we want to spend time together, the support that we need. Like me working through a lot, not the dog, me working through a lot of my mental health stuff before the kids came was really important, because we also know what I need in order to be able to be a functional human. And that includes sleep, and that includes regularly eating, and Jay knowing that can support me in those ways. And that I know the things that set him off, that he finds most stressful, and I can support him in those ways. And if we didn't already know that, I don't know how we would do this. Oh, you're home. Hi. That's got to be it, because the kids are home and now I need to go play with the baby stroller. But I hope that this was a good, hope this was helpful for those of you out there who are just becoming foster parents, for those of you who are curious about how it's been going. I really want to say we love it. I love having the kids in our life. I love when reunification goes well. I love when there are family members that come up and support and take these kids into their own lives. I love a lot of it. I don't love the sense of total lack of control. I don't love how the system, I don't think, is set up to really know what's best for the kids, but I don't know who would know what's best for the kids. And I don't love the stress of when reunification is pending, as it is in our case right now. Like, it's very likely to start happening in November. And so right now in October, it's really hard when you're in the middle of this part we're in right now, which is where reunification is imminent and probably good, but isn't happening yet. It's very hard to parent when you know it's temporary. It's very hard to like stick to your guns and be consistent when you know that everything is about to change in the kid's life. And it is stressful, and it's kind of hard on everyone. It's hard to establish a consistency. It's hard to establish the feelings of forever that really help kids feel grounded and safe. It's hard to like generate that in yourself when you know it's not forever, but also the children need consistency and security, and that's the hardest part. What's next is getting them settled, finishing this up, taking a little break. We're going to Carlsbad to be with my family during Thanksgiving. And then a lot of placements tend to come in over the holidays, so we'll probably have another one. So thanks for watching. This is taking me forever to record because the kids came home. Yeah, okay. And I hope this has been helpful. I hope you have a great... If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and ask. I love talking about foster care. I love supporting other foster families, and I just want to be helpful to you. And I really think more people could do this than they think they could. Mama finger, mama finger. The sissy fingers like this. Have a good week.